This poor young woman came from South Korea thinking that she was leaving her traumatic past behind and she's going to move forward with her life in the United States, ends up accidentally joining a cult who abuses her so badly to the point that the investigator that testifies at the trial is struggling to find the words to state that in one of the videos that she's basically a walking corpse. This is the Soldiers of Christ cult murder. Welcome to Patterns of Behavior, where we focus on the people behind the crime. I'm Ed Choi, and today we're going to be talking about this insane story of this cult that started in Georgia. Our harrowing story today starts off in Duluth, Georgia, which is located about 25 miles north of Atlanta. And Duluth is a very diverse community, and of its about 32,000 residents, 23% of them are Asian. And Duluth sits in a county called Gwinnett County. And this part of Gwinnett County has so many Koreans in it that it's literally called the Seoul of the South. And that's Seoul spelled S-E-O-U-L, not S-O-L, as in Seoul, South Korea. Because there are so many Korean citizens as well as businesses and restaurants, including one of the businesses that South Koreans love, a bathhouse. And bathhouses is a tradition that's been around in Korea for a long time, especially when resources were scarce and people were able to come together so that they can clean themselves. And this tradition has come into the modern age as almost like a spa-like experience. And in Duluth, Georgia, there was one of these spas or saunas known as Jeju sauna. And like many of these bathhouses that are Korean, it had amazing saunas, steam rooms, areas where you can get your whole body exfoliated. There are swimming pools. There's even a restaurant because you're theoretically spending so much time there that you're going to be needing to eat meals. And oftentimes, these restaurants serve very homey, delicious Korean food. And Jeju Sauna was a very luxurious 24-hour spa that is so on point that it has over 4,100 Google reviews at 4.3 stars. And if you look at some of these photos, you can tell why. It is really nice inside. Well, on this particular Tuesday on September 12th, 2022, a 26-year-old Korean-American man by the name of Eric Hyun was standing outside in the parking lot of Jeju Sauna waiting for his dad to pick him up. And Eric Hyun's father drives up to the parking lot of Jeju Sauna, picks up his son, and drives him immediately to a local hospital. And while being treated at the hospital, Eric turns to his dad and says, "Hey dad, I just realized that I left something in the car that's parked in the parking lot of Jeju Sauna." So Eric's dad gets back in his car, leaves his son at the hospital, drives back to Jeju Sauna, walks up to this Jaguar that Eric Hyun had the keys for, and while looking for what Eric Hyun said that he left behind, his father ends up opening the trunk, and wrapped up in a blanket in the trunk of that Jaguar, Eric Hyun's father finds the decaying remains of a 33-year-old woman who at that point when she was discovered barely weighed 70 pounds. And as soon as he realizes what's wrapped up in that blanket, Eric Hyun's father on that Tuesday, September 12th at 10:50 p.m. calls 911 from the parking lot of Jeju Sauna. And the police realize that this body has been in the car for over a week. And when police search the license plate and the VIN number of that Jaguar, they come up with a house that's located in Lawrenceville, which is roughly about 6 miles and about 11 minutes away from that Jeju Sauna that's located in Duluth. And this home belonged to a Korean-American family known as the Lee family, a family that consisted of a mother, her 3 sons, and it's not confirmed if the father lived with them, but their father was a pastor in the community. And after police searched the Lee residence that's located on the 2400 block of Stable Gate Lane in Lawrenceville, Georgia, they come out and state that they have enough evidence to pursue a conviction. The police immediately come out and state that they have found enough incriminating evidence to implicate the suspects that live inside of the home. You see, inside of this nice suburban home that's located on a quiet corner of a suburban block, the majority of the house seemed very normal until the police went down into the basement. And even then, it seemed pretty normal, very neat, but pretty normal. They found washer and dryer and shelves filled with cleaning products like bleach and detergent, and another shelf lined with containers that had seasonal items and things that they don't use that often. But unlike every other home, in the middle of their basement floor that's covered in carpet were pools of dried blood. And then the next day, on Wednesday, September 13th, 2022, the police arrest 6 suspects and charge them with felony murder, false imprisonment, tampering with evidence, and concealing the death of another. And those 6 suspects were 26-year-old Eric Hyun, 26-year-old Gawom Lee, 25-year-old Hyunji Lee, 26-year-old Joonho Lee, 22-year-old Joonhyun Lee, and 15-year-old Junyeong Lee. And of those 6 people, 3 of them, Joonho, Joonhyun, and Junyeong Lee, are the 3 siblings that reside at the Lee home. Now rewind 2 months to July 21st, 2022, when 33-year-old Sehee Lee had just experienced something traumatic in her life. And on that day, she left the only country that she had known to move to the United States, as the police put it, to quote, for the purpose of joining a religious organization, but in reality, Sehee was just trying to better her life. But in reality, she was beaten regularly and starved for weeks in the basement of the Lee household. And a little less than a month after Sehee's body was found in the trunk of that Jaguar, another person, a 7th person, was arrested in the murder of Sehee Cho. And that person was the matriarch of the Lee household, 54-year-old Mihee Lee. And it said that Mihee partook in limiting Sehee's water intake and her food intake, as well as preventing her from seeking any professional medical help, because Sehee was undergoing, quote, religious training. And after taking the suspects into custody, the police found a lot of other incriminating evidence on their phones, found within their chat history, as well as their photo and video album. And some of the evidence that the police found were a couple of videos where the abuse against Sehee was recorded on camera. For instance, there's a video that the police found where Sehee is forced to stand half on her head. So I'm kind of assuming almost like a downward dog position, where she's forced to also put her hands behind her back, and she is continuously whipped with a belt. And in another video, this poor girl who came from Korea to try to find a better life for herself, the investigator that testifies at the trial struggles to find the right words to essentially respectfully say that Sehee in this video is essentially a breathing corpse, because the investigator states that she looks, quote, almost dead. While Sehee is struggling to breathe, they force her into a tub of ice, while Sehee is barely struggling to hang on to her life. And there may be some people out there who are hearing this and thinking to themselves, where Sehee brought this on herself because she voluntarily joined this group. However, she almost immediately after this quote unquote training program began, tried to quit. In fact, there were text messages that were sent between the suspects talking about how Sehee wanted to quit the program almost immediately after it began, where 15-year-old Junyeong Lee apparently told her, quote, there is no quitting the program. And they even took photos of her body laying still on the basement floor before they moved her restless body. And after their initial arrest, when this story broke, this really startled the community, especially the large Korean American community, because as far as they knew, the Lees were a God-fearing household, because at least for a certain period of time, Mihee Lee and her 3 sons regularly attended church. And like I said, it hasn't been able to be confirmed whether or not the father was with them. However, the father is also a local pastor at a church. But little did the Korean American community of Duluth, Georgia know, even though they are aware that cults seem to thrive in Korean societies for some point. But inside of this quiet house on a corner property on the 2400 block of Sturdy Gate Lane in Lawrenceville, Georgia, 26-year-old Joonho Lee, who believed that God spoke to him directly, was in the process of starting a cult. And Joonho Lee, who obviously saw himself akin to Jesus Christ, believed in his heart that he needed to have, just like Jesus, 12 disciples. In fact, before he was arrested, after Sehee's body was found in the trunk of that Jaguar, 26-year-old Joonho Lee met with a female Korean American student at Georgia State University and tried to recruit her to the Soldiers of Christ cult that he had started. And that's the thing, right? For someone to start a cult, to believe that they are some reincarnation of the savior, of essentially a deity, they have to have an uncontrollably inflated ego about themselves to the point that they believe that they are so special. And unlike a lot of other cults where the family doesn't really believe and they recruit a lot of strangers who they are able to get them to believe that they're this special person who's essentially a deity, it makes me believe that Joonho's inflated ego started within the home. Because oftentimes in Korean culture, within a lot of Asian cultures, the oldest son is revered and almost treated to be this like God-sent holy child. And even though 26-year-old Joonho was technically the founder of the Soldiers of Christ cult, I am almost willing to bet that Mihee is the one who started to implant that seed at an early age with her whole family, including with her two younger sons, to get them to believe that their older brother Joonho is more special. Because again, for Joonho to be able to convince his younger brothers, as if many people know who have siblings, there oftentimes are comparisons, there's rivalry, and of course, many times their younger siblings end up looking up to and admiring their older siblings, but this is obviously to an extreme degree. But not only was Joonho able to recruit his two younger siblings and his mother, but one of the arrested defendants, Gawom Lee, is their cousin who was visiting from Korea, who was also indoctrinated into their cult. In addition, the fifth suspect, Hyunji Lee, is Joonho's fiance, which means that unlike other cults that use this idea of family to convince these people to stay committed to the cult, Joonho actually went out and recruited his actual blood family first. And trust me, it's not like they were forced into through intimidation by Joonho to do his bidding. In fact, remember when I stated earlier that Sehee Cho left Korea behind because of a traumatic past so that she could build a better future? Well, it turns out that Sehee's mom knows Mihee Lee from back when they both lived in South Korea. And Sehee's mother is actually the one who sent her daughter to live with Mihee and her family to, quote, find God and also help with her depression. And based off of what we know on how other cults have operated and what they believe and what they do, I'm willing to bet that these 7 suspects used abuse, starvation, and dehydration because they probably believed that they were beating the depression out of Sehee. One of the 7 suspects, Eric Hyun, the person who went to the hospital and was the person driving the Jaguar that was left behind at Jeju sauna that ended up having Sehee's body in it, he was given a bond at $100,000 as long as he wore an ankle monitor and lived with his parents. However, after the arrests, Eric Hyun claims that he is not a suspect and is actually, in fact, a victim just like Sehee Cho. What Eric Hyun is claiming is that Joonho recruited him just like Joonho tried to recruit that female Korean American student at Georgia State University after Sehee's body was found, and that he essentially went along with it and ended up in the basement of the Lee home along with Sehee Cho. Eric claims that he was also abused and starved. You see, Eric claims that he was only able to leave the Lee household because he escaped, got into one of the cars that was parked in the driveway that happened to have Sehee Cho's body in it, and that he essentially drove to Jeju sauna so that he get to a public area to run away, at which point he then called his father for safety to come and get him and take him to the hospital because he was also malnourished, dehydrated, and had also been physically abused, which is the reason why Eric Hyun was in police custody at the hospital for the first 2 weeks after being arrested, and then was transferred to the medical wing of the jail because his attorney stated that Eric Hyun could barely even walk. In fact, in the original photos that were released of all of the suspects, all of the other adult photos that were released were of their mugshots. However, if you noticed, Eric Hyun's photo is different, most likely because that's actually his license photo. In fact, in the updated mugshot photo that they took of Eric Hyun wearing an obvious medical gown, you can tell that in the before picture of his license plate compared to that mugshot photo, that he has clearly lost a significant amount of weight, which seems to track with his side of the story. But in addition to all of the physical torture, Eric Hyun also claimed that he was also financially abused and taken advantage of. Not only was he physically forced and intimidated into wiring tens of thousands of dollars out of his bank accounts into their bank accounts, including maxing out all of his credit cards, but the Lee family also used Eric Hyun's line of credit to purchase a home in Suwanee, Georgia, which is roughly about 5 miles or 10 minutes away from Duluth, Georgia, to be their new church. In addition, Eric claims that some of the physical violence that he was put through included being whipped with a belt. And at one point, the suspects took a sanding block and sanded the skin off of Eric Hyun's chest, as well as stripping him naked and beating him in his genitals so badly with the belt to the point that it started to bleed. And literally as if this was a cult being run by little children, also being shot with an airsoft gun all over his body repeatedly. Eric Hyun actually goes as far as to say that if he did not escape the Lee house, that the police would have found a second body in addition to Sehee Cho's body. And Eric Hyun goes as far as to claim that there are many other members of the Soldiers of Christ cult still at large that the police have not been able to confirm. And because of the nature of the crime, the prosecutors have tacked on a charge to the co-defendants for violating Georgia's Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, which essentially means that they're being charged with gang-like activities, which from a legal standpoint means that the group will be held liable for each of the members' crimes if convicted. And essentially means that they weren't all just accidentally there and one person did more, but instead they were an organized group that worked together to commit the crime, even though one person may have did most of the hitting or whatever, while the other person did other parts, but collectively they were part of a group that did the work together to achieve the results of what happened in this case, the death of Sehee Cho. Now, all of the co-defendants have different lawyers, and Hyunji's lawyer is actually trying to claim that she was being treated as an indentured servant, and that because she was in Korea for the majority of the time that Sehee Cho was locked in the basement and being abused, that she didn't really know what was going on. However, the police have recovered text exchanges between her and her fiance Joonho almost immediately after the quote initiation started on July 27th, where Hyunji was told by her fiance Joonho that Sehee had already not been given anything to drink for 3 days and keeps fainting. And it's just incredibly sad how this woman who went through something traumatic, that they're not saying what it was, and we can probably all guess a couple of things of what that could possibly be, leaves her country hoping that she has this brighter, more free future, to then immediately be transferred to the United States. And the moment that she steps foot inside of that house, she is immediately imprisoned, beaten, tortured, starved, and dehydrated for weeks, locked up in that basement with another person who allegedly was also being abused, thinking that nothing was ever going to go right, wondering if you're ever going to see the light of day again. All just to essentially be used as this torture plaything for a bunch of juvenile man children, including one actual minor and a mother who enabled them to be this way. And Eric Hyun's story seems to line up with what his claims are. And after witnessing what the actions of the Lee family had on Sehee's life, I would assume that he immediately kicked it into emergency drive and was like, oh my God, if I don't get out of here, I'm not leaving here alive. What we do know is that on August 17th, Sehee was screaming for food. And the 15-year-old Lee brother, Junyeong, who was being tried as an adult because of the level of involvement that he had, who was instructed by his eldest brother, the golden child of his mother, Joonho Lee, that if she screamed again, to beat her. And 2 days later, on August 19th, the middle brother, Joonhyun Lee, sent a text message to himself listing all of the dates that Sehee Lee, quote, started fasting and was also abused. With the last date on that list written, quote, 8/18, 1 a.m., time of death, and in parentheses, estimated time. And instead of coming to the United States to better her future, that is what ended up being the last moments of 33-year-old Sehee Cho's life, being imprisoned in a cold basement, starving to death at 70 pounds, while also being beaten for just asking for the bare minimum for human survival. All the defendants so far have pleaded not guilty to the charge of murdering 33-year-old Sehee Cho. Rest in peace, Sehee Cho. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me on another episode of Patterns of Behavior, where we focus on the people behind the crime. I'm Ed Choi. You can find me at Etch-a-Sketch with a J and all the social media accounts. If you are able and would like to help me keep this podcast sustainable, please think about joining the Patreon. If you are listening to the podcast, know that there are also video versions available on Spotify and on YouTube. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Otherwise, thank you for joining me. Be safe, and I will see you on the next one.